it looks promising, and I read John Fonte's review online.
And with Jeff, we did it together.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that.
He does a good job with just about everything.
Yeah, true. I only groaned once. Well, actually, I groaned about 3 times, but only once on a matter of fact. But a reinvigoration of interest in George Washington, and appreciation of George Washington can only be good for him. He's a remarkable individual. And I've just started a new book called Washington's End. E-N-D, End, which is very interesting. It begins with John Adams' inauguration and follows Washington through the rest of his life. And as the author points out, this is something that is usually neglected in histories of Washington. But it is full of interest, and I would highly recommend it.
There's supposedly a new history that includes a lot of his writings that was before the Revolution, that talked about all of his agricultural experiments.
Oh, really?
And his interactions with British merchants, that was really a stimulus for his own believing that we had to separate from England.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, I've got a call coming in. I better turn my phone off. Oh, it's fine. That's all right. You'll leave a message.
Yes, he will. He never picks up my call.
I know, but he's just calling to remind me of the meeting tomorrow night.
Well, exactly.
Turn this thing off. No, I'm not psychic. I have hearing aids.
He left me a message earlier, so I knew you'd be getting it.
Yeah, I've learned I need to turn it off. I learned this 2 or 3 months ago when I had done what I had always done before, which was leave my phone downstairs for the service. And I was sitting there, and all of a sudden my ears were ringing. And I had to pretend like I wasn't hearing anything. Otherwise, people would have thought, yes, he's older than we thought. He's going dotty. Gwen, what time is it?
7:31.
7:31. See, we're late. It's all right.
I'll take the blame.
I would like a pair of please.
Well,
We caught it anyway.
turned it off. Okay, what I want to do tonight is sort of lay the groundwork for what's going to happen before. Partly by, well, you'll see how. I will be talking about 3 different things, and well, let's just start. The first thing to remember is this: Christianity was for the dominant culture in Europe and parts of the Near East for hundreds of years. But it wasn't just a faith. It was a culture. The whole culture was imbued with Christianity in many, many ways. And so what we're going to have to be dealing with, because I'm going to take a chronological approach here, I'm going to begin week after next. See, that was the second time I said it. I'm going to begin week after next, going through some of the saints I've chosen to talk about, beginning at the beginning. That is the immediate post-apostolic age, and then going further in time-wise, picking out some saints to talk about. Now, I have to pick out some. The Roman calendar has over 5,000 saints. Time would not allow. We're not going to go to all of them. But what's important to understand is that when we talk about the saints, we're talking about history, we're talking about theology, and in many cases, we're talking about legends. And I'm going to try to give you some sense of where these saints fall and why each of them seems to me to be either important, theologically significant, historically significant, sometimes charming, and sometimes just plain weird. There's a lot of strange stuff that comes out of the Middle Ages period. Now, I want to tell you about one particular saint now, not because she's super important, but because I think it gives a sense of just how weird some stories about the saints can be. One of the things you're going to probably not like, a lot of you, is the importance in the early stages of the church's life of the emphasis on relics. Relics are of two parts, two different classes. Relics of the first class are actually portions of the bodies of the saints, and they were preserved. And the belief in relics, the belief in the power of relics was very, very, very important historically. There's a story, and it appears to be true, that during the reign of Edward the Confessor, when it was clear that he was not going to produce an heir and that the kingdom was going to be up for grabs, King Harold Godwinson, who eventually became King Harold, who was Saxon, was one of those who was considered quite likely to be elected king. The Saxons were still electing their kings. The king was not automatically going to the eldest son. And another contender was William, Duke of Normandy. Harold had the misfortune to be shipwrecked on the coast of Normandy, and he was taken into the household of William, the Duke of Normandy, his rival. He was not exactly a prisoner, but they wouldn't let him go home either. Not until he'd sworn an oath. He was to swear an oath that he would, sorry, I need a tissue. To swear an oath, thank you. To swear an oath that he would not stand in the way of William becoming king. He really resisted doing this, but finally, on certain advice, I forget from whom, he agreed to swear the oath. And he had been told, look, you can get the Pope to release you from it, no problem. So he agreed to swear the oath. And there was a bit of a ceremony. He came into the room and he saw what looked like a table with, thank you, sir, with a rather elaborate cloth all over it to the ground and a Bible on it. He was to swear this oath on the Bible, which he duly did, and was quickly horrified when the cloth was removed from the table, and it wasn't a table, it was a chest, and it was packed full of every relic that could be gathered together at one point. So he now had not only the Pope to appeal to, but all these saints. That was a famous story in the Middle Ages, but it shows you the power that people believed the saints had. The relics of the saints had, the first class relics. Ma'am?
Before we start, could you define what a saint is? Because
No, I'm getting to it
confused
later.
with martyrs. They don't have to be martyred, do
No,
they?
I'm getting to it later.
Okay, good.
Relics of the second class are not bodies or parts of the bodies of the saints. Relics of the second class are things associated with the saints, things that they touched, or things that they clothes that they wore, or something, something physically that they had touched. Okay, so I want to talk to you about Saint Viviana. Sometimes we call it Saint Viviana, who was martyred about 363, so she's a Roman era martyr. Exact dates and information about her are difficult to document, but it is known that as early as the 5th century there was a church dedicated to her in Rome. She was a saint at Rome.
Is that Viviana or Bibiana?
Both. I'm getting to that.
Yes.
Right. She was a saint at Rome. And according to the legend, the governor of Rome, Apronius, persecuted Viviana, because her father, Flavian, was a member of the government. He was one of Apronius' subordinates, and he was a Christian. And Apronius had Flavian tortured for his Christianity. He refused to recant, and so he banished him, got rid of him. Flavian, the father, died not long afterwards. And without his protection, him being gone, his wife was arrested and beheaded publicly. Their daughters, they had two daughters, Demetria and Viviana, were then arrested. Demetria was traumatized by the death of her parents, and when she was brought before the governor, she died of fright before they could torture her. So that left Viviana alone. Viviana was not tortured, but she was imprisoned. And an old woman was sent to befriend her and convince her to renounce Christianity. This is sort of like, oh wait, doesn't matter. Yeah. But she refused to renounce Christianity. So then Viviana was tied to a pillar and whipped to death. And she was buried with her mother and sister. In the late 5th century, Pope Simplicius built a church over what was believed to be their burial place. And it was said that in that garden, some say right over the grave of Viviana, there grew a herb that had the power to cure epilepsy and soothe headaches. And she was reasonably popular saint in Rome for a good long time. As late as the 17th century, Pope Urban VIII placed the remains of 3 women in a particular shrine. In artworks, with regard to the saints, we'll be talking about this a lot more later probably. The saints have certain traditional visual symbols. Remember, for a long period of time, not many people were fully literate, and so you put up symbols. But if you have a picture, 2 or 3 pictures of 3 different human beings, well, you can't tell much about them. But if there's a symbol there beside them that says, "Oh yeah, that's Saint whoever," these are known as the saint's attributes. Viviana is often depicted with a branch representing the herb, or a pillar, or usually both. Now here's the fun part. She is the patron saint of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Los Angeles. Bet you didn't know that. I didn't. It was Pope Pius IX who chose the cathedral's name. And cathedrals traditionally contain the relics of the saints, so the remains of St. Viviana were removed from the catacombs of Rome, where the shrine was, and moved to a gilt and plate glass sarcophagus, which is located in the niche above the high altar at the Cathedral of St. Viviana in Los Angeles. So what's the weird part? Originally, she had been patroness saint of those afflicted by seizure disorders and those suffering from headaches. But see, her name in Spanish is not Viviana, it's Bibiana. And Bibiana is a Spanish word for drinking. So she is now named also as a patron saint of those suffering from hangovers. So please don't tell me I haven't told you anything useful tonight. Anyhow, if you're interested, you can, if you get to Los Angeles, where I have never been, you can see it. You can go see her. No, I'm not planning to, not anytime soon. So, now, when we talk about saints, there are 3 angels who are considered as saints. They're all mentioned in Scripture: Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael, but that's not what we're talking about. One thing that needs to be remembered, languages differ. In Greek and in Latin, which was the church's languages for a long time, the The word sanctus is translated saint, but it can also be translated holy. So when we say saint whatever, we're also saying holy whatever. And I think it's fair to say that when we think about saints, these angels come under the category of holy rather than saints like human saints. I may return to the angel thing a little later on. Anyhow, that's the end of the digression. Let's go back. I wanted to amuse you. Many cultures and religions, maybe most, revere holy people, living and dead, believing them to be capable of interceding into earthly concerns even after they're dead, and holding them up as worthy of emulation, either for their piety or their learning or their virtuous life. Most of these cultures and religions consider the burial sites of such persons as destinations for pilgrimages. You go to where the body is, and therefore you are closer to them in some sense. This is true of Islam, which has many shrines of that sort. It's true of Hinduism. Judaism doesn't quite have it. It does have what some people call semi-saints, which I think is a funny word. These are righteous and holy individuals, generally known as the tzaddikim or the hasidim, who are seen as models of spiritual devotion or erudition in the law and moral behavior. Good examples include Hillel the Elder and Rabbi Akiva, great teachers from the past. There is one particular branch of Hasidim. The Hasidim are the ultra-Orthodox, known as the Breslov branch in Eastern Europe. In the Breslov tradition, there is what I can only call a pilgrimage in Uman, where their founder, Rabbi Nachman, is buried. And it takes place on Rosh Hashanah, the day of repentance, or the holiday of repentance. And it's considered a pilgrimage of spiritual significance. Many Breslov or Hasidim believe that to attend this gathering, and thousands of people do every year, is a unique opportunity for spiritual growth and sort of spiritual connection. It's marked by deep, mostly penitential prayer and communal worship. The tradition emphasizes that even if the journey to Uman is challenging, the spiritual benefits and the opportunities for a New Year's renewal make it worthwhile. So, who is and who is not a saint? In one sense, all Christians are saints. So we believe. All Christians are saints. But some are more saints than others, let's put it that way. I'm going to refer to them sometimes as capital S saints. That's because they get that with their name. Now, how did this begin, and what does it reflect to some degree? In the earliest of days, it appears to me that the saints were how can I put this? The saints fell into a mold that had been established earlier in Greek culture and later Hellenistic culture. And what was that model? These are the people who are known as heroes. Now, we use the term hero, well, you know what it all means in popular English, but it meant more than that to the ancients. A hero was someone who had exhibited characteristics that were so above the human norm that they would have been rewarded after their death by the gods with some sort of special existence and powers. There's actually a word, heron, for the tomb of a hero. And these heroes are very, very important in the mythology and the sort of, let's call it, what's the word I'm looking for? In the popular sense of the history of the times, in that their graves would be marked with special markers or sometimes even large monuments, and people would go to them to pray to the gods or through the heroes. And I think in the early stages, remember, Christianity was formed at a specific time, and although its roots were deep in Judaism, was much affected by classical Hellenistic civilization. And so the question of who was and was not a saint originally was a matter of local devotion. That is to say, people in the area would say, that guy's a real saint. They may even said, he's a capital S saint. I don't know. But that means that there was local devotion to this saint, and people would go to wherever they had been buried, usually to pray. There was no formal, centralized process for deciding who was to be considered a saint and who wasn't. You started getting remembered as a saint after the local bishop, or in some cases the local abbot, head of a monastery, had said, this guy is the real deal, and we're going to move his body either into the cathedral or into the chapel of the monastery. And from that point on, they were considered saints, and they were put on a calendar and remembered every year. We still do this to some extent. These are what are known, there's a distinction made between universal saints and local saints. Universal saints are saints who are remembered in the calendar throughout the church, wherever the church may be. Local saints are remembered in diocesan calendars. I happen to have at home a really nice book, big old thing, from the 19th century. It's the Oxford Diocesan Prayer Book, and it includes some saints that are purely local to Oxford. Right? Now, obviously, that is not what happens now. It was a gradual process in terms of deciding who is and who isn't a saint. And the process began with one of the popes. This is way back, about 9th century, I think, with one of the popes deciding that nobody could be considered a saint without papal approval. And so if you had a local saint, you would appeal to the Pope to name this guy or this gal a universal saint, which sometimes happened, sometimes didn't. Later, a very, very legalistic process evolved. And the way it works, and it still works to this day, the way it works is that anyone, any Catholic, can make an appeal to the papacy to have someone declared a saint. If that appeal is accepted, then that's just the beginning of the process. After the appeal comes through, if the appeal is approved, then a commission is appointed to investigate the life of this person and to find out all that they can find about the person's life. Then there is a process of determining whether or not this person, this is all done through the dicastery, part of the Roman Curate, the administration of the Vatican, to determine whether or not this person's quality of life qualifies them to be seen as having heroic virtue. And if it does, there's then a formal service at the Vatican with a Eucharist in which they are proclaimed blessed. And you will sometimes see a reference to blessed XX, name. And that's what that means, that person has been adjudged a person of heroic virtue. Then the last and largest hurdle is to be named a saint. How do you get there? There's a process which actually is a little bit like a trial. First, it starts with a thorough investigation of the person, but there must also be attested miracles. And by attested, what I mean is things must be seen to have happened by the intervention of the saint, which cannot be accounted for by any natural causes. These fall on these are usually things like, I was dying of X and I saw Saint whoever in a dream and she told me that I would be healed, and I was. In which case you would have to say, well, could there be any natural reason for that healing? They fall into other categories, but an awful lot of them are healings or salvation from some horrible danger. Well, if those miracles are seen to be attested, then begins what seems to be a sort of trial. And there are two senior canon lawyer clergy who are appointed, one to argue for the person being accepted as a saint, and the other to argue against the person being accepted by the saint. This person is officially called something like the advocate for the faith. In other words, we don't want to make any mistakes about this. But he or she, he in the Roman Church, is more popularly known as the advocatus diaboli, the devil's advocate. That's where the term comes from. The devil's advocate is the one who argues against. So, as time goes on, the cult of the saints, I better stop and talk about the word cult. The cult for the last maybe 200 years has had a very negative connotation, but it doesn't originally. It comes from the Latin word cultus, which means tending to, and it's the root word of cultivation. It was originally an agricultural word, but it later came to be applied to things like buildings, called maintenance. And it involved not merely a belief, but a commitment to serve. That is, a commitment to take care of. So in this has been preserved in some other languages. Martha, you lived in Parish, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you ever look in the French-speaking newspapers for announcements of church services?
Not really. There was one around the corner, and I went to that church and looked in person how much, when it was.
You will find that the announcements, advertisements, I should say, for church services are listed under, if they're Catholic cultic, C-U-L-T-E, and if they're Protestant cultic. So the word does not have negative connotations of us. When I use it, that's what I mean. Devotion to something with an obligation to serve. So during the medieval period, this is when a lot of our saints come from. The late Dark Ages and the early Middle Ages and the late Middle Ages and even later, of course. There are 5,000 saints. It takes a while to get them all together. But where was I? Oh, yeah. It is hard for us to realize, living in a highly secularized society, the degree to which not just the religion, but the culture of the medieval period was Christian. Here are a few things about that. Let's see. When you're in a tall building, we talk about each level of the building as a story. Anybody know why? Because in the cities in Europe, people who were wealthy enough to have homes that had more than one story would plaster the outside of the building and then have them painted. Usually with stories from Lives of the Saints or stories from the Bible. So the first story was when you saw, and up next was the next story and the next story. That's where it comes from. Interesting, yes. Also, and I know some of you know this because I've told you, people were so familiar with how the church worked, with what worship was like, that it came into every aspect of their life. Remember Henry V's speech at Agincourt. He refers to the day. He doesn't tell it. He says, we in this country we say 4th of July. He said St. Crispin's Day. St. Crispin, patron saint of shoemakers. Everybody would have known what the Saints' Day were. Partly because a lot of them were holidays. When how that worked. But also because the saints were so associated with different occupations. There were patron saint of this, patron saint of that. With different countries. Countries had their patrons. A patron saint was sort of like a guardian angel. He was somebody who had a special responsibility to listen to the prayers of those with whom he was patron. Now, there was something else. Oh yes, and it even got down onto the domestic level. There we have a few cookbooks from that period, and one of the things that always amuses people who haven't seen it before, people didn't have timepieces. Very few did. And when you have a recipe, it'll tell you how long to do certain things. So you'll get an instruction which says something like, beat the eggs for 3 paternosters. That's the length of time it takes to say the Lord's Prayer 3 times. Because anybody knew that. Everybody knew. It was the culture.
That is funny.
It wasn't an act of devotion. It was just part of life. That's the way it was. Yeah, Paternoster, our Father in Latin. So we have to understand that we're dealing with, we will be dealing with a number of different Christian cultures that will vary. And of course, then their attitudes to the saints will vary from time to time and place to place. There are some generalities that can be said, but nevertheless, there will be differences, and I will attempt to sort of point out why these things cannot be simply looked at as weird or strange or primitive. They're not. They're different. And one of my themes in glory, there's a wonderful phrase from the inimitable C.S. Lewis that I found myself very fond of. He was talking about the fact that we always seem to think we are better than all the people who went before us. We're the wise ones. We're the ones who really know. They were all stupid. They were primitive. They weren't as smart as we are. They weren't as well informed. He calls it chronological snobbery. And it's a very, very useful phrase to have in your vocabulary. Why? Because it keeps us a little more humble. If we look back particularly let's say the early Middle Ages, and we look at the knights or the king, and we say, what hypocrites they were. They were so hypocritical. After all, they professed to be Christians, and look at the cruel things they did. Look at the cruel legal punishments. Look at the cruelties of war inflicted on civilian populations, and so forth. If they could look at us, they would see us and say, what hypocrites they are. They pretend to be Christians, but. And they would find many areas in which we fall short of them. So that I hope that we can look back when we look at the stories of the saints that we'll be running along. And remember, some of them will be based pretty firmly in history, like St. Augustine, or some of the others. Some of them will be largely legendary, and some of them will be based on traditions of great antiquity, which frequently should be taken very, very seriously and probably have strong roots in historical fact. Finally, and the saints were seen in the medieval period. And again, I keep talking about the medieval period because it's so important in terms of how the attitudes towards the saints were formulated that developed into the attitudes we have today. In the medieval period, the saints were almost ever present in people's minds. Every church that had an altar had some relic. This was a requirement for centuries. By the way, short digression, because I don't have enough material to really fill tonight. Short digression. Some of you may have read the thing I wrote a few weeks ago about how in a Catholic church, our church, the central focus architecturally, interiorly, is the altar. Not the pulpit, it's the altar. Those of you who are on the altar don't know this, but most people probably don't. An altar is usually made of wood. It can be made of stone. But if it is made of wood, it must have inlaid into the wood. If you go upstairs, you'll see it. Well, if they remove the fair linen cloth, you'll see it. Must have a piece of stone inlaid into the altar. And on that piece of stone, almost always, there will be in size 5 crosses, one at each corner, one in the center. Why stone? Pardon me. Because the Israelites were required to sacrifice on stone. Right? And also because Golgotha was a very rocky hill. Why 5 crosses? The 5 wounds of Christ. There's much in every church in the historical denomination that will tell you something if you know how to read it. It's not just stained glass windows. It's how the furniture is arranged. It's a lot of other things. Well, people knew this stuff in the medieval period. Quite honestly, their lives consisted largely of work, family, and faith. And that was pretty much it. And consequently, they tended to be much more conscious, not just of the church calendar, but of the idea of what the saints were like. They were people to them in the way that characters in books can be people to us. Only more so because they believed to still be alive and still, in some sense, be in communion with the living. Now, one of the great features of medieval Christianity was processions. Not just a procession in church, but a procession through the streets. And on saints' days or holidays, these were very big. The local guilds, and each guild had its own patron, remember. the local guilds would produce floats. There were plays about the saints, as well as about incidents from Scripture. And some of them were very, very funny. They saw the saints as being real people, not just like us, better than us, but with a lot of the same foibles. And for instance, patron saint of blacksmiths is St. Dunstan. There's a great legendary story about Dunstan, which was in a lot of these, was often performed one way or another, either in a procession. And the story is that the devil appeared to St. Dunstan in his shop, saying that his horse had thrown a shoe, and he needed shoeing. And Dunstan recognized the devil, so he took up his tongs and grabbed him by the nose. So St. Dunstan's got the devil by the nose, and won't release him until he agrees to certain things. The story varies as to what he had to agree to. But that's what, I forget what town in Britain St. Dunstan was from, but its coat of arms features 3 sets of tongs. And that's why a horseshoe is good luck, because it's a reference to St. Dunstan. Okay? But you can imagine this sort of rough and ready medieval crowd of people watching this play and how they worked it up when I've got the devil, and the devil's squirming and so on. It would have been hysterical. It was just part of life. It was everywhere. Something else I wanted to say about that, but I can't remember. Okay, so let's look at two saints tonight. Now, these are not in order. That is, they're not, even though I'm starting with a biblical saint, the second saint is not biblical, and actually is much later. But when we get together again, not next Monday, but the following Monday, see, I told you I was going to repeat it, we'll begin with the chronological study. But I want to give you some idea of how I want to approach these things. It will be partly historical, partly theological, and frankly, partly legendary, because that has always been a part of the role of the saints. So, who are the saints? Shockingly enough, they are St. Andrew and St. Margaret. Now, St. Andrew has a special place in Scripture. And in the Eastern Orthodox Church, there is a custom that quite frequently, this happens sometimes in the Western Church, it's much more common in the Eastern Church, a saint will be given a second title, somebody, the something. And St. Andrew has a title. He is known as Andres Protokletos. That means the first called. And that's because of one of the four specific references to him in the Gospels. It comes from the very beginning of St. John's Gospel, first chapter, where is represented something that is not represented in the other 3 Gospels. It says that, well, actually I should read it too, because it's not long. Let me get a real Bible here. That one goes straight down. Here's one. Okay.
Plastic.
Yeah, I should read this to you. I'm not going to do a lot of biblical saints because I think that's more Bible study than you had asked for study about saints. So we'll quickly get beyond that. But here we go. John 1. In John 1, beginning at verse 32, we get some of the preaching of John the Baptist, who says that John bare record, saying, I saw the Spirit descending from heaven like a dove, and it abode upon him being Jesus, of course. And he talks about that. And I saw and have record that this is the Son of God. And then the next day, after, John stood and two of his disciples, and looking upon Jesus as he walked, he, John the Baptist, said, Behold the Lamb of God, which is something you hear every time you go to Mass. And the two disciples heard him speak, and they followed Jesus. Then Jesus turned and saw them following, and saith unto them, What seek ye? They said unto him, Rabbi, which is to say, being interpreted, Master, where dwellest thou? Where are you living? And he saith unto them, Come and see. Follow me, is what he said. Come and see. They came and saw where he dwelt, and abode with him that day, for it was about the 10th hour. And one of the two which heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. That's why he's called the first called, because Jesus said to him, Come with me. Other places where John is mentioned in the Gospels, one that is very important, it is important, is in Mark 13. This is what is known, it's an incident from Holy Week. Here we are, Mark 13. This is when Jesus has been in the temple, and the hostility towards him is very, very obvious. I mean, it's Holy Week. It's getting close to the crucifixion. And as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples saith unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. Remember, the temple was a truly magnificent building. It was very large, very richly appointed. It was astonishing, particularly to people, most of whom lived in very simple places. And Jesus answering said unto him, Seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives over against the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign when all these shall be fulfilled? And then Jesus begins to talk to them about the end of times. This is known usually as the Olivet Discourse, and it's Jesus' prophecy of what is to come. Now, Peter, James, and John are the three closest disciples to Jesus. They're the three that he takes with him to the Transfiguration. Andrew is the only other disciple who is ever mentioned in that, with Peter, James, and John. And that Olivet Discourse is very important. There's an earlier passage in John 6, which you're probably all familiar with. It's one of the miraculous feeding stories. And in this story, it is Andrew, when Jesus says, when the disciples say, how are we going to feed all these people and so forth, when Andrew speaks up and says, actually I'm going to check this out because there's something I want you to notice about this, just because it means close reading. When it's Andrew who says, I think he said there is a boy here. Sorry, my eyes are still not recovered from my surgery. There is a lad here which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes, but what are they among so many? By the way, what I wanted to get precisely correct, because it will make you angry, it never says that the boy gave the loaves. There's a lad who was just up, and Jesus said, make the men sit down. Now, there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, a number of about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, is what it says. Okay, I'm not saying the kid didn't give it to him. I'm saying it doesn't say that. And it's worth thinking about for some reason. I find almost most things worth thinking about. And finally, in John 12, as you can see, John focuses a lot on, John has more mentions of Andrew than anybody else. In John 12, there's something that's sometimes not understood to be as significant as it is. Where is it now? Yes. Okay. Again, this is a story from Holy Week, right? So they're in Jerusalem, the hostilities rising, the tensions rising, things are coming to a head, and it's not going to be pretty. And there were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. Now, Greeks is a generic term for Gentiles, for anybody who spoke Greek, you know, at this period, the Hebrews were referred to as a Greek. They came up to worship at the feast. Now, they may have been God-fearers, that is, people who followed a lot of Jewish precepts that didn't actually become Jewish. The same came, therefore, to Philip, which was of Bethsaida of Galilee. It's also where Andrew was from. And desired him, saying, Sir, we would see Jesus. So what does Philip do? Anybody remember? Philip cometh and telleth Andrew, and again Andrew and Philip tell Jesus. Okay, what's significant about this? Well, there are two things significant about it. The first is of lesser importance, but it is this. Of all the names given for the apostles, only two have Greek names. Andrew and Philip have Greek names. Andrew was a brother of Peter, whose name, of course, was
Simon.
Pardon me?
Simon.
No, before the Cephas.
Oh,
Cephas, which means rock. And that, you know, so like a lot of people, multiple names are recorded for him because when you live in a multilingual setting, you often get addressed by names in one language that are different from the name you're addressed by in another language. So, you know, when we lived in South Africa, where there was multiple languages where we were living, Gwen was Gwen to our friends, but she was in Yoni to the Zulus. So they do that. You know, it happens. Andrew does not have any other name recorded other than his Greek name, Andrew. It derives from the Greek word for man, and it means manly. That's all. It's not, you know, it has no reference to God or divinity or anything else. The real reason why this story is important is that Jesus immediately begins his response when they came and when Andrew and Philip came to tell Jesus that there were some Greeks who wanted to speak to him. He responded, the hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. Jesus sees this as an indication that his life is at an end.
His life is what?
Is at an end. Why? Because of all the prophecies that say that at the end of the age the Gentiles will come to God. Now they didn't see it as coming necessarily to the Messiah. They saw it as coming to Jerusalem. But that's how Jesus interprets this. It's a real turning point in the story. It's not what you would expect. there's some Greeks who want, fine, bring them on. Let's see what they have to say. What do they want to know? No. He says, it's over. This phase is at an end. It's a very important thing. Anyhow, those are what we have about Andrew from the Bible. So, what else do we have about Andrew? A lot. Some of it is not written down until the 5th century, so, who knows. But there are some very early references in non-canonical literature to Andrew, and they all tell pretty much the same story. In rough outline, it's this. The disciples scattered. They went to different places to preach the gospel. They sort of divided up the world, and they went different ways. Andrew went to the area around the Black Sea, and particularly the area in the northern part of the Black Sea. And according to the best itinerary we can reconstruct, he went over there and then headed westward and through Ukraine, Romania. There's a later story that he got as far north as Kiev, and in fact is sometimes said to have made a prophecy about Kiev becoming a great city and a great kingdom, which in fact it did for a while, and then on to Greece. And when he arrived in Greece, he kept moving west. And he came to Patras. If you know Greece at all, Patras is on the western coast of Greece, just across from Italy. And it's the second or third busiest seaport in Greece, even today. It's always been a big trade center because, you get in ships and pop right over to Italy, which avoids having to go up around through the mountains and stuff. And in Patras, he falls afoul of the Romans. And he is condemned, and he is crucified. There are numerous stories about his crucifixion. Generally speaking, the two most, I would say, significant, or the two that have had the most effect, one of which is that he was crucified upon a cross shaped like an X, what we call a cross saltire. I hate to tell you this, but the earliest references we have don't say that. They don't say that he was crucified on a cross that way. That pops up a couple of hundred years later. We don't know exactly why, but most people think it is sort of to resonate with St. Peter, who requested to be crucified upside down, saying he was not worthy to die like Christ had died. And now we do know that the Romans did not always crucify on this. There are a number of types of crosses in Christian iconography. They all reference Christ's crucifixion, of course, but they emphasize certain different things. You probably noticed in the Orthodox Church, most generally you'll have a vertical, a short horizontal, a long horizontal, and then a slant. Well, what is that all about? Well, the short horizontal is what was known as the titulus. When someone was crucified, most commonly, this doesn't happen with Jesus and the two thieves, out of concern for Jewish sentiment, but most commonly their bodies would be left hanging for a very long time, as an incitement to virtue on the part of others. And the titulus was where the Romans would paint on it the crime that they were alleged to have committed. And you'll see, when you see in paintings or statues or whatever of Christ's crucifixion, it'll usually have the letters I-N-R-I on it. Jesus Nazarorum Rex Judaeator. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And that was his crime, as far as they were concerned, that he had said he was the King of the Jews. In fact, this infuriated the Jewish leadership that was put there, because they came to Pilate and said, no, take that down. No, it must not say King of the Jews. It must say, I said I was King of the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And Pilate said, what I have written, I have written. The slanted part at the bottom, that represents where the feet of the crucified were put. Okay? And nailed. Except in Andrew's case, not. Andrew was not nailed to his cross. There were various ways of crucifying. Okay? They were not always nailed to the crosses. And in Andrew's case, he was simply tied to his cross. You think this is a kindness? It's not. It means it's going to take you longer to die. And the second aspect of Andrew's crucifixion that you will sometimes run across, if you read really esoteric stuff, is that, again, legendary. Not only did it take him 3 days to die, 3, significant number, and not only did it take him 3 days to die, but he preached the whole time.
Wow.
So the next time I preach too long, please be grateful that I am not St. Andrew, all right? 3 days would probably take you.
Upside down?
So, I talked about patronages. Andrew's patron of a number of different things. He's one of the many patrons of sailors. But he's patron of a lot of places, which is interesting. And he's a co-patron of Greece. But he's the patron of 4 countries. Ukraine, where he preached. Russia, where he's believed to have preached. Poland, for reasons that I have absolutely no understanding of, because he didn't get to Poland, or is not said to have. I don't know why the Polish does it. And if anybody here knows the 4th country, I will give you a nickel.
Slovakia.
How many guesses do we get?
1.
That's in Sweden.
Pardon?
That's in Sweden.
No.
Barbados.
Oh,
Wow. Where?
Barbados. Wow. Why Barbados? Hey, if you look up the coat of arms of Barbados. You know what's on it? 2 cross sugar canes like that. A St. Andrew's cross and sugar cane. Wow. Because Barbadian Independence Day is a feast of St. Andrew.
Oh.
So they chose him as their patron. I love that story. See, I told you there's a lot of culture in it. Now, but there is one more country, of course, that you all know. Scotland.
Yeah, I was going to say Scotland.
Why is St. Andrew the patron of Scotland, for heaven's sake? Well, here's why. When Andrew died, the Christians took his body and burned it in Patras. Right? Later, after the triumph of Christianity, they were removed from where they were, and they were put into a church. According to the story, there was a monk at Patras named Regulus who was advised in a dream to take some of the bones out of the sarcophagus and hide them, which he did. And it seems rather odd. I mean, it's 4th century. It's a Christian country now. You know, it's Orthodox. But why hide those bones? But he did. Shortly thereafter, word came from Constantius II, the Roman emperor, who was in Constantinople, that he wanted St. Andrew's bones. Send them to Constantinople, because he's building a church called the Church of the Holy Apostles, and he wants to have relics of all the saints. I told you relics were going to be important in this story. So they do that. They send off all of St. Andrew's bones that are left in the sarcophagus off to Constantinople. And then Regulus had another dream. And in this dream, an angel told him to take the hidden relics out and carry them to the ends of the earth. So he did that. And he started a journey to the west, not knowing where he would wound up. But he had been told in the dream that he would be shipwrecked. And wherever he was shipwrecked, that was the place that the bones were to be interred and shrine built at that spot. So he sailed west, heading for the end of the known world. And he wound up shipwrecked on the coast of Fife, Scotland. Guess where he was shipwrecked? He should be the patron saint of golf, because he was shipwrecked at a place that is now known as St. Andrews. That's why it's called St. Andrews. All right? Now, some people say that this is just a legend, that the relics were probably brought to Britain with the Augustans, the Augustinian monks, and then sent up to Fife later. But I like the regular story better. And it will feature in the story, will feature later. So St. Andrew was, as far as I know, the only apostle who was alleged to have bones in Scotland. So he was pretty important to the Scots. And in the 9th century, this happened. In the 9th century, the Scots were led by King Angus II, a great warrior. And he had a large army, Picts and Scots, which he led south, hoping to take Durham. But they got trapped by a much larger army of Northumbrian Angles led by King Athelstan. On the night before the battle, Angus had a vision of St. Andrew. And St. Andrew said, "Don't worry, you guys are going to win, because I'm on your team." The following morning, there was a cloud formation in the shape of a cross of clouds. And does this sound wildly familiar?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Constantine.
Constantine at the Battle of the Mulvian Bridge. Well, same thing happened. Angus's army won. Athelstan got killed. And as a result, Angus vowed to make St. Andrew the patron saint of Scotland. And you notice the Saltire flag, which is the emblem of Scotland, is a white cross on a blue background, clouds against the sky.
Mm.
Okay. There are a little bit more about the relics, just because I like the relic stories. In the 9th century, the Byzantine Emperor Basil I decided that it was only fair that Petros get some of the relics back. So they sent St. Andrew's skull back to Petros. In 1204, the French, a largely French army of crusaders, took and sacked Constantinople and established what was known as the Latin Kingdom of Byzantium. Didn't last terribly long, but it lasted long enough that in 1208, 4 years later, the relics of St. Andrew, which remained in Constantinople, were taken away by Cardinal Peter of Capua, who was a native of, Gwen, guess, Amalfi.
Oh, okay.
And he had the bones sent to Amalfi. And they're there to this day.
So
We've
that's
seen them. well, we didn't see the bones. We saw the place where it was. So the Cathedral of St. Andrew is in Amalfi, is where those bones are. So that's a lot about St. Andrew, more than you probably wanted to know. But I'm going to tell you even more than you wanted to know about St. Margaret, because she's one of my favorites. Margaret was an extraordinary woman with an extraordinary story. Some of it we have are fuzzy on the details, but a lot of it is very, very, very well attested. She was a very interesting human being. And she was royalty. She was Saxon royalty. One of the last Saxon kings was Edmund Ironside. And this is in the 11th century. Edmund Ironside was king of Wessex and a few other places in England. But this was the period of the Danish invasions. And he got the name Edmund Ironside for his exploits against the Danes, which were in the end eventually unsuccessful. When he was finally, after a number of victories, he was finally defeated by King Canute. And he didn't lose Wessex, but he lost pretty much everything else. Well, he had a son named Edward. When Edmund Ironside died, Edward chose to go into exile. And, sorry, that's wrong. My apologies. Edward was, when he died, Edward was sent into exile as a child. And he was originally sent to the King of Sweden, King Olaf. There's a story that says that Canute had sent instructions that Edward and his younger brother be killed. And he didn't want to do it on English soil, but he figured if it happened in Sweden, who'd know? But it didn't happen. He was not killed, and for whatever reason, he was sent out of Sweden. Some say first to Kiev, along with the rest of the family, and then not long thereafter to Hungary. Margaret was born in Hungary, somewhere around 1045. We don't know her exact birth date. And she was raised there in the court. Her father was very highly regarded. He was given a fairly large estate, and he fought bravely for the Hungarian kings, and he was very highly regarded. He was known as Edward the Exile, and then later, oh shoot, I've forgotten the Anglo-Saxon word. Sorry, doesn't matter. There's an Anglo-Saxon word which means eligible for the throne. It doesn't mean necessarily crown prince. Atheling, that's
Atheling,
it. It
yeah.
means somebody who's in the line of succession. He's also sometimes known as Edward the Atheling. And they lived in Hungary until 1056. So what's happening in 1056? Well, in 1056, Edward the Confessor, remember him? I talked about him earlier. Okay, Edward the Confessor has no heir. Edward the Atheling, Edward the Exile, is the last living male member of the Saxon royal family. So he is called back to England. And Edward apparently has said to him, I'll back you for the kingship. Now remember, as I said, it was not automatic. The nobles voted for who would be king. So they pack up and go back to England. Things are looking up, right? Wrong. He dies 4 days later. 4 days after arriving in England, he's dead. Apparently of natural causes. And there's Margaret's mother with her children. And she's back, but what now? Well, they live in the court of Edward, and then later, shortly, briefly, Harold, Edward's successor, for 10 years. So that brings us to 1066. Hastings. William the Conqueror. So, William the Conqueror lands, they have the battle at Hastings. Harold Godwinson, who had been chosen as king, not Edgar. Edgar is the son of Edward the Exile, so he's the last adult male. So 1066, they're conquered. After Hastings, the war wasn't over. I know all the popular histories, the sort of condensed things will say, and at the Battle of Hastings, 1066, William conquered England. No, it didn't. It certainly was the handwriting on the wall, but there were years of fighting yet to come against the Saxons. Who did the Saxons elect king after Harold Godwinson was killed at Hastings? Edgar, Margaret's brother, is elected king. He doesn't last very long. Things are bad. And it's pretty obvious to Margaret's mother that this is not going to be a safe haven for them. All right? England is going Norman, and the Normans, being a member of the Saxon royal family is not, it make it hard to get a life insurance, okay? So in 1068, she says, we're getting out of here. We're going north, because that's where the resistance is. We're going up to Northumbria. But, here we go again, another shipwreck. They were shipwrecked on the coast of Scotland. There's a place in Scotland called St. Margaret's Hope, and that's supposedly where or near to where they were shipwrecked. Now, she's about 25 at this point, so she's a mature woman. And they are taken under the protection, I guess you would say, of the King of Scotland, who was one of the powerful kings of Scotland, Malcolm II. Scotland was not in the mainstream of Western civilization at this point. It was the ends of the earth in many ways. It was cold. It was not agriculturally very productive. It was poor. It was rough, and the people were rough. And there was almost constant warfare. When they didn't have the English to fight, they'd turn around and fight each other. I mean, this was a rough place. And what happens is Margaret becomes Malcolm's second wife. He was a widower with 2 sons. So Margaret marries the King of Scotland. She becomes the Queen of Scotland. Margaret was a very sophisticated woman. She had spent virtually her entire adult life in royal courts. She was educated. She was pious. She was a gifted, powerful person. She was also very productive. She had 8 children, 3 of whom became kings of Scotland, and 1 of whom became Queen of England. So not too bad a track record. During her time as Malcolm's wife, she became extraordinarily powerful. Malcolm was off and off at war. And we have good chronicles from this period about her influence and the things that she did. What was she known for? Well, she was virtually co-ruler. I've talked about attributes for saints. One of her attributes is a scepter, a sign of royal authority. And she really did have great influence, and in many cases was making decisions for the country. If you go to the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in D.C., there is a statue of St. Margaret, and the note that is attached to it on their internet thing says that she is put there as a sign of just rule, which makes good sense because of Washington, D.C. But she really was a co-ruler. She was particularly known for her care for orphans and the poor and captives of war. Remember, this is a long time ago. You got captured in war, you might get ransomed if your family had money, but it's more likely you'd be sold as a slave.
Mm-hmm.
And she bought slaves and freed them and paid ransoms for Scotland's enemies who had fallen to them in battle. She was known for a significant interest in education. She founded schools because she had the value of an education. She saw that all her children were well educated and encouraged education in the same way that Hilda Whitby, who we'll hear about later, had done. She had an exceptional ecclesiastical influence. Remember, she'd been raised inside sort of the heart of Western, a good bit of the heartland of Western Christianity. Scotland was kind of odd. It was a Christian place, no question, but it still had a lot of holdovers from Celtic Christianity. It was way out there. It was way away from the influence of Rome. It had some peculiarities in its calendar. They used to begin Lent not on Ash Wednesday, but on the Monday following Ash Wednesday. They kept the day of, even though Sunday was the Lord's Day and the day of Mass, you kept Saturday as a day with no work. There were all sorts of oddities. Under the influence largely of one of the truly great archbishops of Canterbury, Lanfranc, with whom she communicated. I said she was educated, she could read and write. Under the influence largely of Lanfranc, she pushed for bringing Scotland more into the larger church and was successful in that. She founded monasteries and so forth. She also founded public works, which were intended to be helpful to the people. She founded,
What year are we talking again, please?
1100s.
Okay.
Sorry, 11th century, 1000s.
Okay.
Right. And she, one of her famous works was a ferry across the Firth of Forth. And if you look at a map of Scotland, look at the Firth of Forth, which is this big, long inlet from the east coast of Scotland. It runs a little more than 50 miles. And you'll see at one spot, there are two towns, one north of the Firth and the other south. They're called North Queensferry and South Queensferry. That's where it was, and the name's still there. Allegedly, the Romans had a bridge of boats there, but that was temporary. Anyhow, she really left her mark. But that would not be enough, that would not be enough to qualify for sainthood. Where she was truly remarkable, she was truly remarkable in those ways as well, was in her personal piety. She was not only extraordinarily charitable, with a great care for orphans and the poor, but she was very disciplined in her personal life and her prayer life. Very disciplined, not only in keeping the fast days, but also in the way she lived. For instance, during Lent, she would be awakened at midnight every night for a celebration of Mass. I couldn't do that. Secondly, she fed the poor in her own house, in the palace, and washed their feet. And she refused to eat her own first meal of the day until she had served the poor. most of the really devout royal classes at this time and later had private chapels. Hers was a cave. A cave. It's still there.
I'm sorry.
A cave.
I heard that before. What? What did she
The
use?
darkness.
It was her chapel.
Thank you.
It's where she went to pray. You can go there. But you have to make arrangements to go there because it's underneath a public car park. And it's only opened about 9 months of the year, and I'd had trouble with it. It's more than 50 steps up and down to this cave. And that was Margaret. She really was aware of her spirit, aware of her soul, and cared about it. So personal piety, charity, discipline, and personal prayer life, and often many of these converge. I mean, you can imagine that ferry at North and South Queens Ferry meant that travelers going north didn't have to go all the way around. It was a great boon to the people living north and south. That's not why she built it, really. She built it so it would be a shorter road for the pilgrims going up to St. Andrews, which is where the bones of St. Andrew were. There's so many connections. Her attributes, I have seen pictures of her showing her reading to children and giving bread to children. But her actual attributes most commonly are a scepter, a book. Now you see a lot of icons and a lot of representations of people with books, usually a gospel book. Sometimes you can tell by what's on the front. They're usually holding it up like this. She's usually seen reading. She was a person of considerable learning. And a cross or a crucifix. Usually two of these will show. And a crown, of course, because she was a queen. So that will give you, I think you can see why I say that her story, which is well attested to in most respects, that her story really reads like a novel. It's extraordinary, the life that she had. And it ended sadly. Her husband Malcolm was finally defeated in battle, and he, along with one of her sons, was killed. That's why she's patroness of widows. And she died 4 days later. But, as I think I've made clear, she is still well remembered in Scotland. And there are many places that are proud of having an association with Queen Margaret.
Father,
She would have been.
our altar has a stone from her chapel in Edinburgh Castle.
Who does?
Our altar upstairs. I brought it back for Bishop Cahoon when I was there many years ago.
Is that the stone that?
The little stone that's in the where the host is kept.
I had
Where
no
the host
idea.
is kept with Bragg.
Karen, thank you.
One of the guards of the castle helped me get it.
Oh, he was a good dog,
I
eh?
told him I attended the St. Margaret Church of Scotland here in Alexandria, and that our Archbishop would love to have a relic. So he actually pried it out of the chapel.
Now, is that in upstairs or in the chapel over in the
Well, it used to be upstairs. I don't know where it is now. I know Father Nick said he found a lot of things, and I told him the one thing.
Oh, good.
Wow.
Well, it's people like you why the Scots can't have nice things.
We were very careful about it.
That's great to know. Thank you. Well, we've got to make sure that gets located and properly labeled.
Yeah, we do. Wow.
Okay, well, it is just right on 9, I think. Although Gwen will tell me that I'm ahead of time. But I usually run over. I'll try not to tonight. Anything anybody wants to add? And thank you for that.
I would like to say one thing, that I am a great skeptic of the medieval church and the saints and so forth, because I think part of it, the saints were really politically and power hungry kinds of, and commercialization, because any place you had a relic, and they manufactured them a great deal, but any place you had a relic had a commercial aspect to bringing to the marketplace or to that particular cathedral or to that church. All the pilgrimages came in, they get great tithes, and a lot of that went to Rome, and that's why Rome took back a lot of the power originally in designating and making sure that they had some control over it.
That
And I
happens,
think we should talk about that, whether we,
that happens more and more in the later medieval period.
Right.
You don't need to talk about it, just read Chaucer, the partner.
right?
Yeah.
But we see that elements even now in the way the Roman Church designates saints. You look at the political aspects of Mother Elizabeth Seton. They wanted to make a big thing
An
about
American
the Episcopal Church or the Anglican Church at the time. And two, the most recent people that they've tried to have as saints or are in the process of it have very much to do with the politics of identity nowadays.
Oh, I can tell you one that's even worse than that. For a brief period, Charlemagne was considered to be a saint, but then
Yes.
his sainthood was revoked.
Right.
I don't deny that. I mean, nobody who's historically honest could deny it. However, I will ask you a question. How do you think morally that stacks up against the televangelists who wound up being super rich?
I see a great parallel there. And
Exactly.
frankly, I bifurcate the situation because you have, as you said, on the lower level, people who were ill-educated or illiterate or they had no real understanding of the world. This was a holdover of how they had faith in things and told stories, and that's how they were taught. But it was the upper echelons of the church and the church structure that then imposed the more political and commercialization of what a normal person would have as faith for it. So I don't denigrate the faith that people had in them, but I do see that there's a political overlay that we should understand, which is why we have so much of 5,000 saints.
Well, as I believe I said this at men's breakfast this Sunday, there's a saying of which I'm very fond. Let me think exactly how it goes. There's so much good in the worst of us and so much bad in the best of us that it ill behooves any of us to criticize the rest of us.
Right.
And, you know,
Absolutely.
you know why the church is so rotten? Because God doesn't have anything to make it out of except people.
Amen.
And wherever there is power, wherever there is authority, wherever there is wealth, there will be corruption. That's because of who we are and what we are. And I know this historically, but frankly, from living in post-colonial Africa, I saw a lot of it. Well, I knew about a lot of it because for a lot of African men, an easy way to get ahead and to get an education often was to profess a real devotion to Christianity. People tend to forget when you look back at where a lot of the really nasty people in Africa came from. A lot of them came out of missions because that's what, okay. There is no purity. There is very little human purity.
Well, I think that's one reason why we don't pray to saints, but we look to them for guidance where they were able to rise above perhaps the more malodorous of their humanity aspects.
I would say that Margaret is a classic example of that. She was a woman who was in a position to exercise power selfishly and to live luxuriously at the expense of others. And she was aware of that and tried and really did in many ways rise above it. But we're going to meet a lot of saints, and some of them are going to be strange. All right, ma'am.
And one of the things I like best is she is reputed to have taught the Scots manners.
Yes, absolutely. She's
How did that happen?
No, she was a civilizing influence.
Yes.
I don't mean to imply that the Scots were barbarians, But they were, you know, they were rough country folks. They really were. There were no great big cities. There were no, it was really, let's say it was undeveloped. Let's put it that way. And because of the clan structure, there was a lot of mutual hostility, and it was rough. It was a tough place. And it's just amazing. I wonder, you know, that's part of what makes her story so interesting. This very sophisticated young woman who had lived the court life all her life, really, suddenly thrust into this position, and she flourishes. She really does, and benefits many. So, you know, I'm on a personal sort of, I have a thing going. I really, maybe y'all can at the end time get involved with this. I would really like to see us keep St. Margaret's Day somehow, rather than just St. Andrew's Day.
I think that would be
Her
wonderful.
feast day, her Anglican feast day is in June, which is unfortunate. And the
It's
Romans
what?
keep it. It's in June,
What day?
16th, I
16.
believe. The Romans keep it on November 16th for some reason. So did the Orthodox. I don't know why the Scots changed it, and then I don't know why we picked it up. But on the Anglican order calendar, it's June 16th, I think. I'd have to check. Sir.
Televangel, Oral Roberts or Jimmy Swagger?
Swagger. Classic example. But I was really thinking more about the PGL crowd. Okay, I've now lived up to my reputation by keeping you here longer than 9 o'clock. But I'm not in a rush to leave, and we're going to stay and talk. I'm here.
Can I have one more question?
Of course.
The televangelist was Oral Roberts or Jimmy Swagger? You said that already. I can't remember.
Swagger is the
Yes, but I understand before.
Ma'am.
I have a question. Why do you think other denominations don't have saints in their sects? Because I grew up Catholic in the South, and other denominations, they don't seem to really believe in saints.
No, they
I would
don't
always
pretty
go
much.
Yeah.
In Anglicanism, we don't have a formal process like Rome does. But you're more or less considered a saint if you're included on the church calendar, and the church calendar can be modified by the church, by the church itself.
So it's just that they don't have a process for it, so they don't believe
There
in
is no official process. It's purely political.
I think what she's asking is why do Protestants, a lot of the Protestant churches not.
Oh, why?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand
Sorry.
my hearing. At the Reformation, you know why we don't have any bones of St. Margaret? Because at the Reformation, the Presbyterians destroyed them all, except for the ones that were in Paris. They got destroyed during the French Revolution, so they're all gone, okay? Much of the thrust of Protestantism, now understand, Protestantism is a wide thing, and there's a heck of a lot of difference between a Presbyterian and a Baptist, all right? But generally speaking, Protestants say there's only one source of authority. It's the Bible. Anything that professes to have authority in the church that isn't biblical is inherently wrong, all right? And the idea is that the Bible offers the believer direct access to God without any intervention by anyone other than Christ himself. What this led to throughout anywhere the Reformation went was tremendous destruction of precious objects, a lot of destruction of art, a lot of destruction of architecture. St. Andrew's Cathedral, which was probably the greatest cathedral in the north, it was the greatest cathedral in the north, totally destroyed. It's an archaeological site now. By the way, one of the cool things they found in the archaeology there many years ago was the sarcophagus of King Angus. The guy, a sarcophagus commissioned by King Angus. It was believed to be the sarcophagus of, the sarcophagus of King Angus. And it's in a museum there now. I've never seen it. I've only been to Scotland once. I didn't get up that way. This idea that you could somehow purify the church by destroying things that had been misused. And the whole saying, the proper cure for abuse is not disuse, but proper use. And unfortunately, there is a very broad stream of Puritanism. I use it in the popular sense, not the theological sense, of Puritanism in the Christian character. And it comes out sometimes in very destructive ways. And I think this was the classic example. Well, much of the excesses of the Reformation, classic examples throwing out the baby with the bathwater. There's a very interesting sermon by Martin Luther in which he talks about this, about the hostility to the saints. And he's preaching in a chapel which has a painting of St. Christopher. Okay? And he points out the value of understanding what it means. Now, Luther was very much against the sort of corruption in the church that he was talking about, the sale of fake relics and all that stuff. And yet he understood there was a value in these stories. They had things to teach that were worth being reminded of. Unfortunately, most of Western Protestantism didn't follow that course. The Anglicans did too, but when the Puritan revolt took place and the English Civil War, when those guys got into power, they just wrecked everything they could get their hands on. I mean, they were barbarians, as far as I'm concerned. And I got a strong sense of what was lost. When do you remember in Salisbury, we went into that little church, I think it was Church St. Thomas, but I can't remember. And there was on the wall a portion of a medieval wall painting of the Visitation. It was absolutely charming. Anonymous artist, but just a charming painting of Mary's visit to Elizabeth. And the only reason it was there is that the Puritans in that area had been too lazy to chisel it off. When they chiseled off most of it, but just whitewashed the rest of the church. When the whitewash was removed, they found it's just a portion. It's kind of heartbreaking because it makes you realize how much English medieval art was lost. Just not lost, but destroyed. The same thing is true in France, but it wasn't a Christian group. It was the revolutionaries, and they pretty much wiped out French art, French medieval art. The architecture remains, but they destroyed so much. It's really kind of heartbreaking to those of us who are art buffs.
Some believe in the same tactic for saving America.
Good point.
Yep. Well put. And I think future ages will bewail their insensitivity and lack of appreciation for the fact that the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. And, you have to, I won't say make allowances. I'll say it's important to have an understanding of what the times were indeed like. Otherwise, it's very easy to condemn what you don't yet understand.
Well, look at what's happened in the Mideast too, with the radical groups. They've destroyed architecture that predates Muhammad and just gone right through museums and archeciological fields and everything.
Oh yeah,
It's
those
terrible
people are
destruction.
barbarians, and that's been the thing for a long time. When it's not a random streak in Islam. It's something that surfaces again and again. Famously, when the Arabs took Egypt, they destroyed anything that was written, unless it was a Quran. And the Caliph there, the leader of the said, if it agrees with the Quran, it is unnecessary, and if it disagrees with the Quran, it is evil. So you destroy it all. Yeah. And that's how they heated the baths there for quite a while.
So
But there were elements within the Arabic culture that valued all cultures.
Later.
Later. Right.
mm,
And they were actually the
they
repository
did-
probably of the Alexandria Library.
And they didn't last long. We've just gotten back from Spain, and everybody, no, not everybody, a lot of people glamorize what life in Andalusia was like for Christians and Jews. You know why Moses Maimonides died in Egypt? Because his family got the hell out of Spain when the Almohads came in, and they were a new breed, or they were the old breed, really. And they thought, oh man, these people have been way too easy on these Christians and Jews. We're going to show them who's boss. And a lot of them left, including Moses Maimonides, who was probably the greatest Jewish scholar and philosopher of the Middle Ages. Maimonides was a great mind, really.
Well, the one good thing was usually they'd come in, they'd take the Christian churches and cathedrals and turn them into mosques.
Yeah, well,
So
we
they
did
saved
the
the
same thing.
architecture at least.
We did the same thing.
The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Please.
I'm sorry, dear. I'm holding you
So
on.
we got
I should not have talked so long.
Here's that cane on it.
I will try.